I am sorry, this poem was selected for you. It's probably one of the worst poems that I read in your syllabus, and I'm not going to waste your time going on a full rant about this. But I feel like a rant is needed. I'm going to stick it at the end if you're interested as to why this poem just disappoints me. But let's just get straight to it. The poet, Amin Kassam, I know very little about him. Born Nairobi, Kenya, and he's an established poet, but I'm sure this is not his best poem. Haven't read him more fully, can't comment on it. Nothing too much that I can add to his background. But I will just say that part of the annoyance of the poem is that it's just its vagueness, and how wishy-washy it is, also very abstract, so it leads to me making very pseudo-philosophical explanations of things that make me cringe. So hopefully you can get through it as well. So let's just jump in. I've set some couple of images just to introduce the general feeling that I have of the poem, and that is going to lead us into the realms of the abstract and modern. Let's get cracking. Okay, so here it is, the first image. Utter darkness. This poem, for me, the words you want to try and remember here are isolation, desperation, and particularly that word futility. We're going to get to that now, but I'm giving you another abstract image here, a personal creation of mine. You'll see the wonderful small white dot in the center. Let's say this speck could be you, me, and in some abstract way, we get a sense of being alone and being unable to connect with others or to fully communicate what you're experiencing. This is a growing theme throughout the 20th century and our 21st century. Just think about it. In 2022, there were over 500 hours of YouTube content uploaded every minute. That was 2022. That was only on one social media platform. At a deep level, we are very desperate to be heard by others. We try and we try and we try to connect, but do we actually succeed? This poem would suggest no. In the end, we can actually never succeed in expressing what we really mean, nor can others ever fully understand us. It's pretty bleak, but follow along. On some level, we are just isolated. Taking the title into account, the word strangers, if you look at it, are people that you don't quite know well. And this poem is saying that even our closest friends, our family, and even you yourself do not completely understand you. In other words, you are a stranger, something that is never completely known. And then forever is another word you need to focus on here, of being alone in a permanent and inescapable way. So this is not something that not a problem that we can solve. Another famous picture that you can look at to just get this theme across is Edvard Munch's The Scream. This is a wonderful depiction of isolation and also the feeling of disconnection, and it embodies the modernist approach, right? Here we've got a painting depicting a sound, which is a scream, and it does it very well. You see the agony, how loud the person is suffering through the magnificent depiction here. But what you get in the background is no one can hear him. We can't hear him. It's a painting, and he is being ignored. He's alone. This is the modern life element that is coming through, and it's central to the poem. That we live in these various cocoons in the world, and we're increasing anxiety that is so often reported about in the world. This is part of the growing isolation, being trapped in your own head, unable to express what you fully mean. Bleak, bleak, bleak. Okay, so we get to it. Here is the straightforward intention. This poem is all about suggesting that there are parts of ourselves and our experiences that will never be fully expressed by us or fully understood by others, and that when language and communication inevitably fail, we are left isolated and alone. In short, parts of what we feel and experience are ineffable, inexpressible, cannot be articulated and shared. That word ineffable is a great one to use in this poem, and a nice one to remember in answers, effectively being unable to fully communicate. So give the poem a read, think about that intention, read it to yourself as I usually do. I'll put a link of a poem below, print it out if you want to take your own annotations to just cement things that we're going through, and I'll catch you at the next slide. If you're struggling with the abstract nature of this poem, how difficult it is to decipher, try think of it as being in a nightmare. Things don't have to make complete sense as you're going through with it. It's almost symbolic, of things, of its message of being alone. Okay, so part of what creeps me out or frustrates me a little bit about this poem relates directly to the speaker in the opening line here, which is he assumes that he's talking to us directly. Right? We don't know who he is, but it's kind of preachy, quite kind of creepy in a way, actually. And it kind of comes across as a lecture directly to us, and I feel a bit aggrieved by it because I don't necessarily agree with the philosophy to begin with. So to have someone preach it to you, I don't know if it's the best way to convey this message, but it's very forceful and it's quite direct. So that's something to say about the use of the us and the speaker talking directly to the audience. So on the first line, there's a vague metaphor going on here. I think the common way of looking at this is looking at passenger and compartment together, those two pieces of diction. We've got this metaphor of comparing existence or your journey through life to a train ride. Just bear that in mind. There's one other metaphor coming later on, but it's quite general and vague, but we get a sense of it. Anyway, something to bear in mind here is that this is a free verse poem, right? So this means that there's no structure, no direct structure, no set line length, no set stanza length. So my divisions here are random in these slides, but just be able to comment on line arrangement. In fact, in free verse, this becomes even more significant. So something you need to bear in mind is kind of lack of punctuation, the short lines. A lot of the interpretation of the voice and the reading is put onto you as the reader, right? You have to do a lot of work in figuring out how you read it and how you read those shorter lines. So here we've got a nice one, compartment, is segmented all in its own line there, and you get a strong sense of how that one line adds to the feeling of separation and kind of being isolated. The word compartment even meaning kind of separation as you separate out things next to each other, and it's on its own line. So look at that and closely. It's kind of done again with that line, all strangers. One line all on its own. There's almost a pause that comes with it, but it enhances that sense of being isolated, being cut off, being put all alone, right? This is a pattern in the poem. You'll get it quite quickly. And then something to notice is how there's this mood of uncertainty and helplessness, particularly when you look at some of the lines. So the words here, passenger, right? As a passenger, you're quite helpless. You're just along for the ride. This uncertainty, we do not know where, right? So there's no sense of where you're going. Strangers, again, makes it a bit creepy and unknown. You don't even know the people next to you. And that verb thrown, right? You've just been dumped into this area and you don't know why you're here. And so, again, things are happening to you and you lack control. And that's absolutely critical. And then something also to bear in mind, typical modernist move here, this kind of paradox that we have. There's many of you, the textbook definition is that it's a contradiction, but when you look at it in another way, it makes sense. I prefer just saying it's an irresolvable contradiction. So those who travel without arriving. There's the paradox, because travel implies a destination, that you're going somewhere with a purpose and a goal, but to not arrive means that you never get there, you never attain the goal. And so why are you traveling in the first place? So there's this contradiction of having a goal that you never reach, that is impossible to reach. Yeah, that paradox also just adds to the confusion in the poem, the uncertainty, because there's no clear meaning to just arrive at in the poem. Okay, it reminds me, this traveling without arriving, of a better way of putting it, which is a quote by Lewis Carroll. If you don't know where you are going, any road will get you there. That is the idea that we're looking at. Okay, and so we're back to this creepy aspect of the poem, which is the speaker feels like an intruder to me. He's trying to access my own mind, or he's assuming things about my own thoughts. You can get this from the rhetorical question structure here and the use of those second person pronouns, the you and the your. It's intimate, and he's trying to be persuasive. He's really trying to persuade us to believe in this idea of being unable to fully communicate or even understand ourselves, as mentioned in the intro, right? So notice a word like whispers has connotations of, well, actually the denotation is just being very soft, but also just difficult to interpret, hard to hear, okay? So it's very difficult to pick out our own thoughts, which can be even hidden from us. So if they're hidden from us, how can we expect other people to understand what we're trying to say? So another vague metaphor going on here, comparing the desire to share your secrets or your experience to trying to open a window to let people in to your heart. A nice potential denotation connotation question with chambers. So chambers are literally, and as a denotation, the four chambers of your heart, right? But it's also got this connotation of being a cut off secret area, right? That it's quite difficult to access usually. So that's a nice word to potentially look at, right? And then to move on, because it's free verse, you often have these structural questions, and repetition is key there. So focus on the sense of though you strive, though you are you, and then striving again. We've got a build-up of a sense of urgency through the repetition, right? So you're trying harder and harder to share the secret, and pay particular attention here to the use of the conjunction though. So we've set up a subordinate clause, and the main clause is still to come. We're going to get it on the later slide just now, but the conjunction though sets up the failure of what you're trying to do. So we know that whatever is happening here is not going to work because of that though and that repetition, and it's particularly in your face because it is repeated at the front of the lines. So it's the technique of anaphora, right? And so you get that striving, that trying as hard as you can, and it's repeated though, and so it builds up the urgency and desperation of trying to convey what you mean. Okay, so here we get to the real main clause of the sentence, which is the real truth is the failure of being able to share what it is you want to share. So notice that set up with the conjunctions. Again, in this final section, repetition is key in this poem, and it gets more intense at the end of the poem, right? So look at the one part, the one small part, the one part, even again on its own line there, isolating it, showing how important it is, and showing how impossible it is to actually convey that one part. A good technique, a modernist technique here, are these deliberately vague phrases. So you are right to ask what one's part, what one small part of what, and we have to guess, and you have to work quite hard as the readers to actually understand and decipher what this one part could mean. And you could gloss this, you could explain this as a part of your soul or your innermost experiences, or anything along those lines could be what the one part means. It's very similar to a technique used by T.S. Eliot quite a lot of the time, and he has in my mind, a better line, which is he describes the small part as an infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing, and the vagueness is actually very cleverly used. Okay, moving on a little bit to the diction there, the penetrate. Just bear in mind that if you had used the word access, penetrate has a more forceful approach to it. So at the end of the poem, in those final 3 lines, it's not just about your inability to share, but it's neither I nor anyone else will ever penetrate. So people are also trying very, very hard to penetrate and understand each other. And that word penetrate shows how forcefully and how desperate people are to make these connections. But even if you're trying to speak clearly and if people are listening very closely, there's still something that fails. There's still a disconnection. And the final line here is absolutely key to the poem. Notice that it's indented, right? And it's a reversal of the title. So instead of strangers forever, we have forever strangers. Why has this been done? Obviously, this is a big question that you could get. And I would say it adds to the inevitability, and a nice word to use here is the inescapability, right? How inescapable it is that we cannot fully communicate. And so it's at the beginning and the end, and that's why it feels like you're in a bit of a trap. You're kind of trapped within yourself, trapped within this predicament, and it's permanent and inescapable. So a nice word there is the especially with the indentation, right? It's a really final statement. So that word finality is quite key here. Something that you can't overcome, right? So again, bleak as. Okay, some useful words to use in this poem and some concepts that are particular to this poem and you can use in answers. Isolation, desperation. I like the word futility, disconnection, all words which, capture the feeling of failure, trying hard but not arriving at a solution, and the sadness of being a bit isolated. And then another one which I used in the earlier slide, ineffable. That word stands out, right? This poem is really about how ineffable our experiences are, how we just can't succeed in communicating them. So concepts, both the metaphor and the paradox in this poem are the metaphors are vague, so we get a sense that it's a train. We get that window metaphor, but it's just difficult to grasp entirely what the metaphor could mean. There are maybe multiple ways of interpreting why the poet has chosen those metaphors, and so the burden of the interpretation is on you. Typical modernist approach, you have to work harder to make sense of it. And this is enhanced by the paradoxes, right? That big one with the arriving when there's no destination. I can't quite remember the full line, but it's irresolvable. You feel like you're trapped, and making sense of it is quite difficult. You can look at it one way and it sort of makes sense, but then it's contradicted by looking at it another way. I mean, why are you traveling to begin with if you're not traveling to get somewhere, right? So it adds to the insecurity that the poem develops. And finally, you could expect pronoun questions, so be used to the perspective, the speaker talking directly to you. I find it quite intrusive, is how I see it, is that he's just talking and he repeats that you, as if he's almost coming closer and closer to our own thoughts, almost making his insecurities ours, I feel, if you want to put it bluntly. And then free verse, just because it's free verse, okay, obviously there's less control and shape to the poem, and so that also makes it more fragmented, right? It makes it more difficult to interpret or open to different interpretations, but you need to be aware of structural techniques in free verse. So why the deliberate short lines? Use the term isolation, right? Or making you feel cut off and alone on certain key moments in the poem is what you need to pick up on, as well as repetition. You don't even need to remember anaphora, which is particularly at the beginning of lines, but there is a strong use of repetition to build up the urgency, the desperation in the poem. So focus on those concepts and you'll be fine. You got it. Quite an easy short poem to deal with. I imagine that it would be used for intertextual questions quite easily because it's quite open and vague. Easy to take this poem, connect it to another poem, and just don't waffle too far on this poem. It's easy to do that, to get wrapped into spirals that are not directly related to the poem. That's it. Good luck. Hope this helped. Okay, so the rant. Again, completely optional, but I feel like I had to justify my criticism of the poem in the beginning. And the trouble with it for me is that it touches on one of the biggest modernist themes of the 20th century, one that's still very relevant today, that alienation, that isolation, the loneliness, if you want to put it that way, of the human soul. And it's such a profound and important theme, but it's just capturing it in a way that isn't very original. It's not adding anything, because this has been covered by so many great writers. And so I feel, from my perspective, that I've been listening to this magnificent symphony conveying the tragedy and the suffering of this idea. But to read a poem like this coming at the time it does, after all of these many other great pieces and artists, is like picking up just one lonely violinist from that orchestra and just listening to them alone. And so if you're interested in this idea, you really need to read these brilliant other forms. And this poem is very would not exist without a writer like T.S. Eliot, right? Read the Holloman, or read T.S. Eliot's Preludes, right? Or pick up Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, or read Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. It's everywhere, these ideas, and they are conveyed much better in those works. And they all kind of describe and help you to encounter this kind of profoundly terrifying and unsettling ideas on some level. And often you read their works and they make you even hate the writers for conveying these ideas so well, until you look deeply and you think about it and you realize actually that they're capturing something that you've experienced all along, that you've kind of sensed going on in certain moments of your life. And then you actually begin to feel kind of an appreciation for these great writers, right? That they're wrestling with some of these problems and these feelings that have been there all along. And so what really frustrates me with this poem is that A, it's covering something that has already been covered very well by so many great writers, and B, it's not adding anything to what they've done. It's not doing it in any kind of original way. In fact, it's a very derivative poem. It's just following on from copying, imitating the same trends that have been set up by many other writers. The poet's still very good. He knows what he's doing. He's a great writer. But in this theme, in this idea, he just, I don't think, has fully delivered on this really big, challenging topic. But yeah, the advantage is it's quite short, and it allows you to kind of bring quite a few of your own opinions and interpretations to some of the open-ended lines in the poem. So yeah, if you're interested, go read some of those writers and follow some of those ideas a bit more closely.